Hello and welcome to the debate on Press TV. I'm your host, Behruz Najafi. People in the Iranian capital, Tehran, attended the mass rally today. They expressed support for the Islamic establishment and urged the judiciary to adopt a tough line toward those behind the recent riots in the course of protests over gas price hikes. The Foreign Ministry has condemned Washington's backing for the riots as part of its maximum pressure campaign. Tehran holds Washington responsible for the tension and is going to file lawsuits against it at international tribunals. In today's show, we'll discuss the goals sought by a number of foreign countries and their support for the recent riots in Iran and the ways they would benefit from a chaotic Iran. To begin, let's watch a background report.
Tehran streets once again became the scene of demonstrations, but this time to voice support for the Islamic establishment and condemn the violence that ensued last week's protests over the jump in gasoline prices. Millions of Iranians gathered in downtown Tehran on Monday, holding banners that read, "We hate violence," while separating the line from what they call rioters.
We are critical of the government's decision and we insist on our demands. But this does not mean that we are against our country. Those infiltrated the protests and vandalized buildings are not with us. They are the U.S. agents.
We have come here to voice our support for our leader, and despite the economic hardship, we are not giving away our support for the Islamic Republic.
Last week's protests broke out after the government increased fuel prices by at least 50%, something which came as a shock to Iranians who were already suffering from economic difficulties. But the protests turned violent after a group of people set ablaze gas stations and other properties. The government branded these people as foreign mercenaries or tried to hijack the peaceful protests. This came after Washington expressed its support for Iranians, something which Iranians refer to as tongue-in-cheek.
I want to send this message to Pompeo and Trump. Listen carefully. We do not want your sympathy. We Iranians know your real intentions and will never recognize you as our friends. By sanctioning us, you have proved that you are our enemy.
Energy is heavily subsidized in Iran. This has resulted in high fuel consumption in the country, which stands at roughly 110 million liters per day, 40 liters above the maximum output required. The government says the new price hike is aimed at moderating consumption rate. These people draw a clear line between legitimate protests and what they call vandalism. They still have demands from the government to mitigate the current economic pressures, but they say they will not allow their protests to, quote, tilt the balance in favor of foreign opportunists. Yusuf Jalali, Press TV, Tehran.
Now, joining me in this debate tonight will be author and journalist Eric Wahlberg from Toronto and journalist and political commentator Said Mohsen Abbas from London. Good job, both of you, gentlemen. Let's go to Toronto first. Eric, Iran's RGC commander has accused the U.S., the U.K., Israel, and Saudi Arabia of stoking the unrest in the country. He says that the rise in gasoline prices was just a pretext for an attack on the Iranian nation. Your comments on that, please.
Well, it's a typical U.S. strategy. If you look at Venezuela or Hong Kong, that you help the dissidents, the rioters, and hope to make the government weak enough to create chaos. So it is a typical strategy, and it's up to the Iranian government to prevent that from succeeding, and they have. And I think that the demonstrations today show there is strong support for the government in Iran.
Okay, Mohsen Abbas, let's have your thoughts on that.
Well, it was clear to anybody who knows anything about the Islamic Republic and the geopolitics of the Middle East that this was an operation that was being fomented and indeed constructed from outside of Iran. Subsequently, it's been proved through the already, I think, through the arrest of many of those MKO members that, again, the Americans and the Israelis, etc., are using the same old tactics, agents, domestic agents, or really trying to sort of jump on the idea of color revolutions, jumping on the back of genuine protests, because at the end of the day, Islamic Republic of Iran is a democratic country. People are allowed to freely express their opinions, and that's what many people were doing after the gas hikes. But what happened after that is very, very interesting, and that's what Major General Salami has pointed to, that actually this was instigated from outside. Evidence? Well, you only need to look at the GCE's operation in Saudi Arabia, which is an entire, what I would describe as a troll farm, or a troll army that effectively latches on to these kinds of situations and starts spreading the message across Twitter and other social media. These are techniques which are taught to them by the Americans and the other Western powers, but the Saudis, who have less problem with their own public because they're draconian and dictatorial and despotic, can get away with having these troll farms and these kind of social media interference techniques. They did it with Iraq, they did it in Lebanon, and they did it with Iran. This is all in the space of 1 month. Their trial run was in Egypt with their own guy, Sisi, where they tested it out again. But actually what Major General Salami has also, I think in a way, proved is that the Islamic Republic is ready, not only militarily, which they've already got the Americans to back off any kind of warfare against Iran, conventional warfare, but now they've taught them a lesson through what they've done, the way they've operated and responded to this insurrection by these MKO types and other operatives. What they've told the foreign powers is actually, you can't do anything. The Iranian people see through the lies of the Americans in terms of their economic terrorism, and they see that their own government is trying its best, because we all know that the corruption that has been lurking in some quarters has been outed. Many people have been sent to prison in high office, so the government is having a clean out. And I think what's going on is all of these things that the Americans are doing, these ill-advised tactics, what's happening is that the Iranian people are more and more cementing around their own leader, who's been very wise on this. Ayatollah Khamenei is getting the support, and actually it's backfiring. The whole notion of economic terrorism, the whole notion of plots to riot and destroy buildings, that is actually backfiring on the whole American policy towards Iran, which is about regime change.
Now, Eric, we talked to some analysts and observers, and some of them argue that any time that Iranian people are critical of a government decision, like this recent one, there are some countries' officials, including those in the United States, that jump at the chance and then overplay it and lead it toward riot and violence that they deserve. So what's Washington after by making such provocations?
Well, it is promoting its own agenda. Its agenda is world hegemony, and Iran stands in the way of that in the Middle East. And this is not going to go away. This is going to continue. It's been 40 years now since the revolution in Iran, and the U.S. has never backed off for 40 years. You think it would learn its lesson that it's not going to overthrow the government. The government is strong. The economy is battered, but it's much more self-reliant than it was before. Just as Russia has become much more self-reliant. So countries like Russia and Iran that are targeted as being against the U.S. world empire, they cannot be cowed. They have strong sentiment of the people, and the people will suffer even through the privations. And it's interesting also that the gas prices were increased by 50%, but also there's gas rationing to make sure that needy people are able to access gas. So it's not just a question of increasing the price, it's also making sure that the gas is used for necessary purposes rather than for just non-necessary purposes.
Mm-hmm. Now, Said Mohsen, the Iranian foreign minister, in a reaction, held the U.S. responsible for violent acts and vandalism during the protests against the gasoline price rise in Iran. And it's also announced that Iran is going to take legal action against Washington and international tribunals. Your take?
I think it's very important that Iran keeps the pressure up, because the world knows that the Americans are bullies, they're tyrants, they're oppressors. The trouble is they've got the world on a ransom, because the petrol control of Saudi Arabia and the other monarchies in the Middle East by the Americans means that the dollar is linked to petrol. So therefore everybody's scared of tampering with that, even the Europeans, to be honest, although I think they're actually just hook, line and sinker with the Americans and just as bad. But the Americans themselves are responsible for over 81 cases of interference with democratic elections in other countries since 1946. This is on record. You know, there is a lot of evidence from various sources, but 81 countries where the CIA has specifically interfered to infiltrate an electorate vote to go their direction, so they have their own regime. You know, over, I think, 59% of those efforts have actually been successful. So here is a country which is a serial abuser of democratic rights of other nations, because what it wants is, as my colleague said, they want hegemony. They want to maintain that. You have to expect them to do that because it's the nature of the beast. But for the Islamic Republic of Iran, the answer is really more self-sufficiency, more understanding of the Islamic principles that it stands for, i.e., you know, you can live on frugality, you can have generosity, you can be self-sufficient, you can have a benign and very a sort of fraternal policy in terms of the region, and that's exactly the direction they've been going. But the problem is that the Americans have not let them alone since 1979 and the revolution. They started with a counter-revolution funding of liberals. That failed. They launched Saddam Hussein with a chemical-based warfare on Iran. That failed in spite of 1 million people dying. Then they've started the Green Revolution, countless other coup d'etat attempts, color revolutions. It's been non-stop. And of course, the latest is just the increase of an economic terrorism, which began after 1979 with the war, with the military embargoes, but then gravitated towards the Iranian people being deprived of medical items, being taxed for things beyond all affordability, quite frankly. And that's the criminality of America, which is transparent. And I think that the Islamic Republic of Iran is doing a good job of getting this word out. But the trouble is, of course, the propaganda and the power of American money does put up a stiff resistance. It can't last long, because you can fool the people some of the time, but you can't do it all the time. And eventually, I think the persistence and the stoic nature of the Islamic Republic and its people, and let's not forget the IRGC and the leader, I think that will pay dividends. But they have to have fortitude and continue their sort of resistance, their noble resistance, I could say.
Mm-hmm. Eric, there is also another thing on the sideline of this straight riots. It's in a statement by Iran's top security official. He's spoken of the country thwarting a planned attack on SLE oil facilities in southern Iran. And this is said to be in retaliation for Yemen's Ansarallah hitting the Saudi Aramco facilities a while ago, as you know. Who could be behind this?
There was an attack thwarted, I believe, recently.
That's right,
yes.
On Iranian oil facilities.
Certainly, the Saudis aren't really capable of doing that. So I would suggest that it is some combination of the U.S. and Israel. Israel has been attacking Iranian troops and people working to help against ISIS in Syria. That they're quite open about. They brag about their attacks on facilities and killing Iranians and other civilians. That's not a problem. So I'm sure that they have the expertise. I would point the finger more to Israel, but I can't say, because of course, this is done without anyone knowing who's actually doing it. So it's some combination of U.S. At least Trump is nodding his head and letting. He has actually said before that Israel has the responsibility and has the green light from the U.S. if it wants to attack Iran. He's actually come out and said that. So I think that it's probably Israel that's behind that recent attack.
Okay, Said Mohsen Abbas, let's have your thoughts on that.
I think Israel is the defining geostrategic, if you like, linchpin for all American policy in the Middle East. Everything revolves around protecting Israel and protecting the rape resource agenda which the Americans have. So it's not hard to recognize it, because Netanyahu's on record even recently saying that Iran was in for more attacks on Iranian soil. So, you know, they're not making any bones about it. They're making it very clear what they want. They wanted anything from nuclear attacks through to economic terror, through to psychological operations. All of this, both Mossad are capable of, the CIA are very capable of it. They have history, they have track record doing it. They're doing it in Lebanon today, they're doing it in Iraq. So it's hardly, you know, it's hardly difficult to place who the suspects are on this. But I think there are fingerprints which the Iranian establishment could unearth with a little bit more, I think, intelligence themselves. I think that these things need to be exposed more, how they go about doing these operations. And it's part of educating not only their own public, who who are being, well, attempted to be sort of cajoled into rebelling, but also for the sake of the rest of the world. Because let's not forget, most of the British or the American or the European populations, they're equally politically and security-wise ignorant. There's a lot of illiteracy out there. I mean, yes, there are activists who know, but the vast majority of the Western public is totally unaware of the foreign policy, if you like, terror committed by European and American power in the Middle East. They see everything through the lens of their own state-run media largely, and the corporate media run by the likes of Rupert Murdoch, who actually feed them this dire of an alien nation called the Islamic Republic of Iran, which has Sharia law and which terrorizes its women or is ready to take over the world. They've literally created the image of the likes of Islamic Republic of Iran as almost like a James Bond Dr. No character type institution. So there is fear, and I think more needs to be done to make sure that propaganda is countered.
Now, Eric, with all the open support that Washington has lent some anti-Iran terrorist groups, among them the MEK, or also known as MKO, is it in a position to claim that it's supporting the Iranian people?
That's their claim. The U.S. claims that it's representing the people, but as was clear from the earlier broadcast just now, that individuals that were demonstrating said, "We don't want your sympathy. We know what your real objectives are." So I think that the Iranian people are more savvy to what's really going on. I don't think that this attempt to claim supporting the people has any validity. It's the same in Bolivia. It's the vast majority were supporting the government, and there was a coup, and who is going? And now there is a new government that is unelected, very much like what Trump wanted to do in Venezuela. So, claiming that it's on behalf of the people, and that claim was clearly ridiculous in both of those cases, and it's equally ridiculous in the case of Iran.
Now, it's not only the U.S. support for terrorist groups like MEK, and you know, with the main reason behind the rise in anything and basic commodities, also gasoline and whatever else in Iran, is U.S. unilateral sanctions against Iran. So how can Mike Pompeo just come out there and say that we are standing by the side of Iranian people, we are supporting them? What kind of support is this? You're depriving them of their basic necessities, even pharmaceuticals and food.
Well, it is just belying all logic and all rationality and all common sense. But then do you expect that from a man like Mike Pence, who's a Christian Zionist, who believes that actually it's a good idea that Israel kills Palestinian people because it's going to herald in the coming of presumably the Antichrist, or they say Christ. I'm not sure which. But Pence is a psychopath. not only that, most of Donald Trump's administration could be easily defined as psychopaths, because if you look at the definition of psychopaths, honestly, they really do fit it. I'm not just using the word flippantly. They are puppets for moneylenders. They're puppets for the Israeli policy. They are puppets for the greed and the avarice, which is at the heart of the American industrial, economic and arms complex. The whole system is built towards crushing and destroying and overawing the smaller nations. They've made no bones about it. They're doing it with the tariff wars, even with the likes of China, for instance, and Russia. So even the self-sufficient larger countries are not spared from this tyranny. And I'm sorry, there's nothing else that one can say it there or describe it as. And until the American people themselves, first of all, wake up that they're actually electing psychopaths, they're the ones who are actually stupid enough and actually mizzled or deluded enough to be able to bring forward the likes of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump into power. These people are psychopaths. How are they even elected as leaders? I mean, you've got to look in the West at your moral, political, if you like, fabric. How are people who are this dysfunctional, this megalomaniac, and this kind of nasty and pro-tyranny consistently elected? Because it's not Donald Trump who started this economic terrorism against Iran. It's been there in every administration that I can remember since the 1979 revolution. They've had this going on for ages. So let's not make the excuse that Donald Trump is a psychopath. No, systemic psychopathy exists in the American system. It's the system that needs to be changed there. And the Islamic Republic stands against that, because that's what the whole revolution was about. And the Islamic Revolution is saying to the world, look, we stand for independence, and we stand for virtues, but political moral virtues, and we want to survive without being bullied. And that's really not acceptable to the American system.
Okay, Eric, I got one last question. Let's look at Europe. Germany and France also expressed deep concerns about news of unrest and violence in Iran. Why didn't they make good on their commitments within the nuclear deal if they are really worried about the Iranian people? Briefly, please.
Well, yes, the nuclear deal, Iran was undermined by it trusted Europe to hold to the deal and to not to be bullied by the U.S. And Europe, all of Europe just backed down completely and basically undermined and tore up the deal. So that is very, very foolish politics on their part. If they want to have a good relationship with Iran, they have to show that they are reliable allies, and they failed to do that. So we're stuck in this position now where Iran must just hold firm and wait until some kind of realism comes in. That will come only through changes in the governments in the West. So we can perhaps. There'll be a new government in Britain, and it will begin. It requires one country to take the initiative and to stand up to the U.S., and we haven't seen that yet. So let's hope that the new year will see some move on the part of Europe to undermine or to negate what the U.S. has been doing for the past 4 years.
Well, hopefully that happens before it's too late. Okay, let me thank our guests who joined us in this program. We had author and journalist Eric Wahlberg from Toronto, and journalist and political commentator Said Mohsen Abbas who joined us from London. Thank you for watching this program. We'll see you next time.